Do an intro.
I'll do an intro. Like a cold intro or just like an intro?
Just do an intro.
Okay. This week we're talking about Children of Men. It's a really dumb name. Men cannot produce asexually, so that's it.
But
That's
neither
the
can
culture
these
cast
guys.
for this week.
Neither can these people.
Yeah.
See, it's actually very clever if you think about it.
Oh yeah, it's like everyone is men.
That is an interesting point I had not considered.
Everyone is a man now. It's like socialist Twitter. We're all men now.
Oh yeah. Oh my god. This movie's about us.
Is it like, not only is it like socialist Twitter, but it's a great example of buy your own logicking the feminists.
Oh shit.
Yeah. Ooh.
What about a day where everyone was a man? Step into, our shoes.
Walk into a world where women can't get custody in court.
Men are bad. I am not a fan of men, and so I want to make that clear.
I don't think this movie's that reactionary, you guys.
No, there's no way it's
you
reactionary.
I'm interested to have a conversation with you about that. So, this is directed by Alfonso Cuarón. Am I pronouncing that correctly? I'm probably not.
Probably not, but...
Let's describe it first. So basically, no one can have kids anymore because a virus has infected every woman, and so everybody's infertile. No one can have kids. And so the premise of the movie is, or the environment of the movie, and you guys can kind of jump in and help me out here, but basically the world has gone completely to shit. As Mark Fisher put it, which we're going to get into in a minute, the world has not ended, and it is not going to end in the future. It is in the process of ending, to paraphrase him a little bit. So in the first scene, I think that paints...
Hannibal. That sounds like a dystopian hellscape, to be sure. But what perspective do we get to view this hellscape from? Who serves as our eyes, as our stand-in? Who am I supposed to be in this movie?
An attractive Brit.
By the name of Clive?
I can get behind that.
Theo is the protagonist. He's played by Clive Owen, and the first scene kind of paints the dystopia for you pretty well. He's in a coffee shop, he's watching the TV, and on the news they find out that the youngest person in the world has died, and he walks out of the coffee shop.
Baby Diego.
Yeah.
Baby Diego's dead.
Is that really the name?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
Also one of the things is in the intro, it's like one shot of him like getting coffee, going to pour like some whiskey in it or something, and then a shop exploding like right next to him.
Yeah. And then another important thing is the immigrants in cages, and the rhetoric on the news and the ads surrounding immigrants, where it's basically like if the entire city or the entire world was the airport, and it was like, report any suspicious activity. And then I think the most revealing ad that they did, and it comes back throughout the movie, it's like, this person is your cousin, this person is your therapist, this person is your masseuse, etc., etc. These people are all illegal.
It did feel very much like Starship Troopers in a way.
Wait, so they were saying that I should call the ICE on my masseuse and my cousin?
Yeah, basically.
That was the funniest part. It was like
it felt like Starship Troopers
funny.
though, with the advertisements constantly like being this sort of like, what would fascism look like if they could make TV ads for fascism?
Well, I think it would look a lot like, publication of record like the New York Times magazine suggesting that you should indeed call ICE on people you think are undocumented. Huh.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, they missed the smug woke folks saying actually it would be good if we deported all of the Germans.
This is going to be
that's another thing in the movie.
Sarcastic episode.
One of the things in the movie that I thought was pretty interesting is the refugees although they are predominantly non-white, there's a lot of like European refugees, like from the continent. And
from Eastern Europe too. I met there's a couple scenes where he walks by someone speaking in an Eastern European language and like begging him for food, and he just looks confused.
And there's when he's going to the concentration camp at the end of the movie, there's two big things. Like when he gets on the bus, a woman's asking him for bread in German, and then during the big like rally where there's like this big rally of people like screaming Allahu Akbar.
Oh, that wasn't even a rally. That was a straight up. Like,
and they were just firing guns and shit.
Yeah.
There was another one with like French flags and shit.
That was so odd.
Yeah,
I was trying to figure that out.
So this is a future where there are like racialized gangs, and they get together. The EU has become street gangs. Brexit was right. Everyone is a hooligan now.
All of the world is Britain's prisoner, and it's Winston Churchill's wet dream.
That's a good way. That's a very good way to put it. But to explain why he's at the concentration camp in the first place, he finds out that his ex-wife has found a girl who got pregnant, and his ex-wife is part of this radical. What should we call them?
They're sort of a paramilitary.
Yeah, that's a good term. A paramilitary group called the Fishes, and they want him to help. Very
messianic, right there.
Yeah, they want him to help escort the girl. Her name is Key, to a group called the Human Project, who's supposedly going to. I think they were like a scientific group. I think it was implied that that's what they were.
Yeah.
But there's also this like there's a couple lines where everyone's like, "Oh man, the Human Project actually exists." So I think there's also a bit of a messianic vibe with them too.
One of the big things about this movie is that people keep talking about how there's a lot of Christian imagery in it. That there's a lot of jokes where I think one of the things is where the woman who's pregnant is asked like, who's the father, and her first reaction is to say like, I'm a virgin.
Yeah, that was a really good joke.
I know, because when you're watching that, you don't know what the fuck's going on, and you're just like, what? Wait, hold up, and then you realize it's a joke.
Is that real?
Yeah,
she's making a joke.
Yeah, she's making a joke while they're at like the pothead John Lennon type at his house.
Oh, Michael Caine.
Caine killed that role. That was
you couldn't
sick.
help but love him, even though he was obviously like the smug, woke, liberal cartoonist.
I mean, it was a coping mechanism for living in like the worst possible world. Because when you do see him in those moments of like sort of like actual duress, he does have like not just redeeming qualities, but like genuinely good, positive things that he does. Like when he's getting shot down by the head of the Fishes, he's just kind of like, fuck you, man. And goes down flipping him off.
He does like the little pull my finger bit. Like that was respect for that. That took fucking balls.
Yeah.
What was should we talk about his wife?
The bravery of fictional characters. That's one of my favorite things to do.
Oh yeah. We're getting very close to comic book levels of discourse here.
Oh god. I'm like, stop me, because I had a comic book phase in high school. So if I go off the rails here.
Don't dox yourself.
I've never read a comic book in my life. That's for nerds.
I have no idea who Todd McFarlane is. I do not know what the Savage Dragon is.
I watch cinema.
Yeah.
I watch film réel.
I go to the cinema and watch cinema verite.
There's a little guy called Goddard.
No, sorry, you mean Kino? Yeah, that's right.
Oh god, there was a kid in one of my film classes. I don't even know what we were watching, but it was like redistributed by Kino, and he like freaked the fuck out when he saw the Kino logo on the screen, and everybody, like, the looks that he got were fucking gold.
That's amazing.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it was uncomfortable.
So, you were saying, Jerome, that you thought this movie wasn't particularly reactionary, and I feel like we don't need to do that much plot exposition. So, like, he's, like, escorting this lady with the baby through this dystopia because, and I want to talk a little bit about, like, the world has become a dystopia.
Yeah.
In this movie, it does not fully explain why the world has become a dystopia, but the basic premise
But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Because you're not viewing it historically. You're viewing it as like the point of view of someone living in it.
Right. That's a fair point.
And to someone living through a disaster, it doesn't really matter why it happened. It just matters that, like, fuck, I can't drive on this road anymore. Fuck, like, this building blew up next to me. it's the million little cuts that affect Theo that we're concerned with, not like, well, shit, will those scientists ever figure out how to solve this problem?
That's the brilliance of the film in not overplaying its hand. It does a much better job of sketching a believable world.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to do soft sci-fi, this is a good way to do it. I would tend to agree, where it's like, it just leave things to the imagination and keep it centered on, a limited scope so that the workings of the world, right, outside of the scenes don't really sort of like betray any of the scaffolding behind the plot.
Which is kind of fascinating if you consider it, like, and this is going a little off topic, but if you talk, like, you hear the same thing with horror where it's like you want to leave things to the imagination, which I think, to make more of an artistic point, kind of reveals a little bit about, like, a fundamental issue at the heart of cinema, where it's like, do you want to leave things to the imagination, or do you want to show it? To put it very basically, but like this idea that it could be more powerful to leave the audience to imagine what you're trying to tell them, or you could show it to them in either like very openly, or you could stylize.
One thing that's fascinating here is that, like, so this movie has like a famous long take in it, right? Is it only one big long take, or is
there's several long takes, but there's one that everybody everybody know, the one
everybody
towards
loves
the
a
end.
good long take, apparently. And one thing
Gets
that's
those
interesting
cinephiles
about that
going.
is that those long takes are, I mean, I wouldn't say they're stylistically a horror film technique, right? But the way in which they're used to build like visceral tension and like a very sort of like anxious investment in the plight of the characters on screen is somewhat similar to the way in which a horror movie can use like lingering takes and then a jump scare to ratchet up tension before a release, right? But in this case, it's part of a flow, and so it's got less of that setup punchline feel.
I think keep going.
Yeah, I felt that like the long takes were sort of doubly appropriate because, first of all, we're following Theo as he like navigates these like shithole scenes where all these people are, you see these little sort of snapshots of how bad things are, or like implicate. Like one of the things that I liked was there's a scene where he gets kidnapped. There's a guy with a gun, and he gets tossed in a van. And if you watch the way the scene is shot, it shows you some of the people in the background, and none of them react at all, or they just kind of look and then walk away. Nobody has really any like, oh shit, someone's getting mugged, because they're so broken and it's so commonplace. And these long shots allow you to see this sort of the extent of the damage. You don't stop seeing it for so long that it keeps enforcing what it's like living in a world that looks like this. Just one of the reasons I think the movie is so like, you walk away from it feeling like, holy shit, like.
Well, the thing about, like, you talk about how it does a lot of background sketching and does a lot of subtle details, and the way that the people don't really react because, like, that's just normal for them. I think that then enhances, like, he flips it with the final long take, because then, that's so much is not so much as happened. What basically happens is everything stops. Like the whole point of that take is to see that everyone hears the baby crying as he's because the baby's been born at this point, and the fishes have the baby, and so he goes in this building and tries to get the baby back. And he gets the baby back, and the baby starts crying in the middle of this like huge shootout between the fishes and the military. And as he reaches like the bottom of the stairs where the military is coming up, and this whole time like people have been stopping and watching and touching the baby and like singing songs and saying prayers as he's moving through. Mm-hmm. And the military reaches the top of the stairs, and they kind of meet the baby, and the soldier at the front sees them and is like, everybody cease fire, and so they all stop firing, and so it's just completely silent, and everybody in the frame is looking at this baby. And I think that contrasts really nicely with having people like barely react to anything because their reality is just so shell-shocked,
and it's very
broken.
Religious.
It's
very religious. You're seeing this contrast between the bottomless horror of everyday life, where you have to isolate yourself, and you see all these pictures of isolated people where you've got Michael Caine living out in the woods smoking weed with his like catatonic wife, and then you've got
the
Theo,
fishes.
who basically lives in a box.
The fishes who had their country house even though they lived together.
And then comparing that to this very brief but transcendental moment where you sort of, because to these people, they're not seeing this baby and knowing that, like, oh, the human project's out there, oh, things are going to change. Nobody has any idea what's going on. And so, like everybody else, you see something that's actually miraculous. You see something that's actually outside of the real world. Because these people have been living for how long? 18 years without any babies.
But isn't it, if you make a good point, if everyone will stop and sort of like bond together over this miraculous experience.
But I don't think it's bonding. I don't think it's bonding. I think it's in contrast to bonding, these are like, you're seeing how people react to sort of this divine presence just forming out of nowhere.
Bonding in the sense that like people are sharing a connection. It's bonding in the same way that people who watch a movie together in a movie theater are bonding. It's a communal experience, but not one that brings people together.
Yeah, and immediately after the baby like gets out of the building and they're like walking past some of the soldiers,
the shooting starts again. Yeah.
So would you say that is like a visual metaphor for the hope for the future is like what can momentarily pause us from endless violence and suffering?
Yeah. I mean, I think obviously that's what it is. I mean,
yes, but also I think it's interesting that it's entirely temporary and it doesn't actually have any real effect.
Well, that speaks to the need to sustain it. Like, it's saying that yes, this thing can stop the violence, but only if you keep it around.
Only if everybody has kids.
If only we were having kids.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, well, also this going back to like the non-reactionary position that this movie takes, I think
I want to hear more about this.
Yeah, so the politics of this movie are pretty interesting. Clearly this film comes from a pro-refugee, pro-immigrant political stance.
And also heavily anti-fascist.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Like, I think the immigrant thing is just used to sketch the world.
Unlike other films that take place in Britain, like, for example, The Wall and V for Vendetta, I'm just going to use those two as examples.
28 Days Later.
The fascist influence of Britain is always this sort of, like, noxious thing that came out of nowhere and now we're all stuck with it. Oh, God. But in this film, it's a little more a exaggeration or overdevelopment of pre-existing impulses within England.
I mean, not to get all comic books here, but that's 100% the point of the V for Vendetta comic, is that this shit is absolutely present.
I have not read the
English
comic.
psyche.
I haven't either.
Don't
so
talk about
if you want to, explain the comparison.
I mean, the comic, I would say that the V for Vendetta comic is about 100 times better than the movie, and much deeper and more fascinating. You got to read the book, man. You got to read the book.
Because all the conservatives think Alan Moore is like the ultimate reactionary.
But basically, bringing this back to the movie, I think that in Children of Men, it's creating this sort of version of English fascism that is reactionary, not imaginary. It's not imagining a world in which, like, fascism just exists because it's mean. It exists because it's reacting to some kind of drastic change of material condition, which is how fascism comes around in the real world.
And why there is fascism present in all of our lives, all over the world.
Yeah.
And I feel like one thing that's important to note, right, is at least when I use the word fascism, I'm definitely not just referring to like a centralized government under the heading of, say, National Socialism or a similar kind of fascist constitution and the like. I think it's important to note that, like, what are really, sort of I would define as fascist tendencies are a tendency to, like, get obsessed with a particular form of power, right? And oftentimes that power has very strong alliances to capitalism. So I think it's interesting when a movie like this, takes on a number of fascist tropes and doesn't, like, sort of explicitly call them fascism. And you also have, like, a government official figure who is not painted as a collaborator in some type of fascist regime, but just as, like, a guy who has, like, a normal job and goes to coffee shops that happen to be bombed. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting because I think that, people say, like, don't normalize fascism, blah, 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 blah. But the fact of the matter is fascism is a deeply normal part of a lot of our lives, particularly in, like, a cultural sense where a lot of us have sympathies towards authoritarian power, basically. Sympathies toward hierarchies of control, towards telling other people what to do, telling ourselves what to do, etc. And so I think it's interesting to think about how a movie like this depicts the sort of not just external forces of fascism, but also that like internal, that fascist in your head that makes you repeat that the world has to be a certain way, that things just work a certain way, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Which is the definition of Theo's character, because he was a member of the Fishes, and then he chose to leave. Like, he chose to live a normal, quote-unquote, life. And there's a little dialogue about that between him and his ex-wife, who's played by Julianne Moore. And it's like, it's never quite explained why he left.
Julianne Moore's role, I mean, it's fairly short. She's not on screen that long, but man, she fucking killed it.
She kills it. I mean, she's really good.
That was a really good. And then, like, spoiler alert,
you probably don't want
dies.
to hear her talk politics. Oh, I said Julianne Moore is a pretty good actress, but you probably don't want to hear her talk politics.
No, I never want to hear any actor talk politics. They are all bougie.
Except Rob Delaney. Shout out, Rob Delaney. Yeah, I think it's interesting that they never really talk about why he left, but it's clearly established that he did leave. But when Rebar, you mentioned the fascist the normalizing fascist in his head, like you have to wonder if that's what it is, because I think all of us sometimes have that feeling like, maybe I should give this up. Maybe I should just try to live a normal life. It would be a lot easier.
Yep. And you compare the sort of security and comfort of his life with the like obvious degradation and horror that the refugees are going through every day around him. And this is sort of an exaggeration of our day-to-day life. Just because the refugees in this movie are more physically close to where he lives and you see them in the same frame as him doesn't mean that these two conditions don't exist already today.
Absolutely.
And that, I think, is one of the most interesting stances the movie takes. It's that, yes, you can be like Theo. You can, or more like Nigel, the guy at the arts program.
Yeah, we need to talk about him.
Yeah, where you just sort of like exist in this bubble of that fascism has provided you. Because that's what fascism does to people who collaborate. It creates a bubble where you are safe and protected from.
It provides you with comforts. It provides you with probably a measure of authority.
It buys you out.
But I think I think the film's incredibly nihilist with Nigel, the guy who he goes to get papers, right? Like that's who we're referring to here.
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's incredibly nihilist in that scene because he's talking to Nigel and he asked him explicitly like, why do you? Because Nigel has all this old art. He has like I think he has Michelangelo's David and. Some other really iconic pieces of art.
He's got Guernica, which is amazing because you've got this enormous, crazed painting next to him and his like moron fail son eating dinner
and like doing that was weird too.
Some video game or something.
Yeah, it was like little cubes. It'd be weird. It'd be interesting to go in depth on that. But anyway, like, because I think that if we want to talk about the normalization of fascism, like that is the most normalized it can get because he asks him, "Why do you have all this shit?" It's not gonna have. There's no point in it once we all die because there's no kids, so the assumption is the human race is gonna die off. And the guy's just like, "Oh, I try not to think about it." Like he literally just comes out and says, like, "Oh, I'm not going to consider."
I think that might be the film's sort of adrent moment where you go, well, it's the banality of evil. These people are just sort of they don't know any better. They're just doing what they do.
Well, which is what I like about it because it knows where to it knows who would be the I try not to think about it people, and it knows who would be the rebels, and also with the Fishes, the crazy opportunists, basically terrorists.
In another perspective, fascism is it inculcates this sort of world that people like Nigel can live in where they can not think about things.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so persuasive to people like Nigel or to Theo, because not thinking about things is great. Not thinking about things is exactly what you want. Especially when things are bad. So being provided the opportunity to just sit down and look at Guernica and shut up and not do anything and yell at your kid to eat his pills, that's what you want in that situation, and fascism will provide it for you, so long as you're willing to also not think about the people in the cages outside. and the film doesn't
so
allow you to not look at the cages because of the way it's shot and the way that everything's structured. You, the viewer, have to see all these things going on, even though it's very clear that Theo and Nigel are doing everything in their power to ignore it.
I think that's a very eloquently put, Mallory, and I want to present to you a take that sort of jumps off of that, and then I want to get you and Hannibal's reaction to it. I think you make a great point that, like, cinematography-wise, it actually does a really good job of, like, forcing you to confront these things. But as we've already pointed out in multiple instances, all those things currently exist in the world, right?
Yeah.
People, refugees in cages, calls to deport your neighbors because they're illegal, so on and so forth. Like, the fascism and for that matter, the rich people sitting in their houses with literally, like, more art and wealth than they will ever be able to enjoy or appreciate in their entire lives. Exists already, right? And they don't care about the fact that it is utterly wasted on them, and it's like nobody needs to live $1 billion lifestyle. Most people fucking, like, I don't think anybody needs to live $1 million lifestyle. I mean, maybe we all could if we redistributed the wealth, but that's not my take. My take is, given that all these things exist, and I see movies and really all cultural objects as, like, posing a sort of imaginary, a set of ideas, a vision, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't it make this movie kind of reactionary that it essentially poses that we should identify with the people who have let all of these things happen, and more importantly, it poses all of these as inevitable. It's like, oh, people stop having kids or whatever, some crazy thing happens, and then of course everyone's going to become fascist, everyone is evil, everyone is going to be, like, fighting each other tooth and nail, the world will fall apart because we can't trust ourselves to put anything together outside of this system. And to me, posing that imaginary where that world is inevitable and our, like, collaboration in creating it is inevitable just as a fact of human nature is a really dangerous myth. I don't like that.
I would push back on that a little bit and say that I think it's fairly clear that you're not supposed to identify with the fishes, at least not once you figure out that they're going to kill Theo. But also, I think you're not meant to want to be Theo or Nigel. It's an incredibly at least for me, it was an incredibly frustrating experience watching all these people do their day-to-day life and go about their day while you, the viewer, are constantly saying, like, do something, stop, get those people out of those cages, yell at that cop. You constantly want to interject, but because you're a powerless viewer, and because Theo and Nigel are powerless, destroyed people, you realize what it's like being a victim, well, the second class of victims under fascism. I think it's less of saying, like, this is an inevitability, this is what it would look like, and more saying this is what it would look like if more of a call to action than a trying to be hard science fiction.
I think that's a reasonable point, and I think, yeah.
I'm leaning more towards Mr. P's point here because I think I do agree that it's a call to action, but I think because there's no, like, and this would also depend, and this would require, like, going into the film's universe and asking, like, oh, was there resistance to this as it was happening, as it was being, as this system was being built? But also the way that the fishes are portrayed as, like, these horrible, opportunistic people who are, like, they want to keep the baby for political purposes and, don't really seem to actually care about.
Counterpoint, they're dem soaks.
True, but yes, they are dem soaks. But look at how there's
the baby is Rosa. No, the baby is communism. The mother is Rosa.
Yes.
The baby is Rosa. Theo is Marx, and the fascists are the fascists. Boom.
Marx, he was just trying to be a Hegelian. He was, like, doing his due diligence. He was going to university. He was like, yo, I want to be a German idealist so bad. And then they just wouldn't let him. And so he was like, Lord, forgive me. I'm back on my bullshit. I'm a communist now. I'm rescuing this damn baby. I'm done with Hegelianism. See you never.
Friendship ended with idealism. Communism is my new best friend now.
Although, for real, Marx is a Hegelian.
Yeah,
and
young Hegelian squad who out there.
Anyway.
But I think Hannibal, responding to what you were saying in a real sense, I think, it is it was interesting to me that the fishes were sort of like also bad, because you're sort of left as a viewer like, what the fuck? Then who am I supposed to be rooting for? But the
Because he
point
doesn't
is,
present an alternative. Like, that's what I'm saying. Like, he doesn't say like, there would be people who resist this. He's saying everyone is out for them. The
alternative
is Theo. Or their ideology.
The alternative is Theo.
But he's one guy.
But he's successful in doing.
He's white.
That's true. He's white as well.
Dies
they kind of
and gets the baby somewhere. Like, if you want, like, let's go back to our take on the long take. Like, the violence continues after one baby. Like, the people having the knowledge that the baby exists isn't going to change anything in the world of the film. So I think...
Well, there is no solution to fascism other than exterminating the fascists. And...
Yeah. But, like, even
I don't think that's really gonna happen in this universe. But I think the response of Theo is the response of what anyone does when they're anti-fascist and fascists are in power, and they are forced to take a stance there. They follow through with it until you can't continue anymore. He just happened to be successful in what he was doing before he died.
It is worth... I think we should... Like, the ending, like, he gets shot, he dies, the baby... They meet the Human Project people right after he dies, and the baby gets safely to them. But, again, I think that there's still, like, no hope at all.
Yeah, it's not a very...
That's just speculation. I mean, I think that you could come out of the movie feeling like a single person sacrifice opened the door for the possibility of change.
Very
or you
Christian
could come out of the movie.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And also a father's sacrifice sort of by proxy to this baby. I'm not kidding.
A father that didn't have sex with the mother?
Whoa. A mother who bears a miraculous child who immediately brings peace as soon as he is seen by people. I mean, it is a deeply... This would be a great movie to hear a Tradicals take on.
Oh, God.
I'm not kidding. Okay, guys, next episode.
Do you think they like it, right? This has to be a Tradical favorite.
Oh, God. I mean, I don't want to speak for them. I have not read enough. I haven't read enough Anselm to really get into their minds, or John Donne. But I think this is a fairly Christian influenced rebel perspective, and I think a lot of our critiques of it could probably be seen as like positives if you're coming from a Christian perspective, which we're not, because we're fucking...
That's fair. I think this is a Christian movie, though, because like as soon as I start thinking about that, like with the fishes and the baby stuff, then I was like, okay, main character's named Theo. Theodicy, like theology. I mean, it seems likely that it's a reference to the problem of theodicy, which is like the problem of suffering. Like, why does God let evil happen, right?
I mean, Theos is literally God in Greek.
Yes, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit.
So then what do the fishes represent in that? Because, like, I think it could be a reference to, like, the fishers of men quote.
Yeah.
So, like, the fishes are subhuman, but no, like, but they're lost completely.
Well, yeah, because they use violence.
They're the Pharisees. They're totally. Oh my God, they're totally the Pharisees. Because they
but
don't.
also the fishes
deep
are
Bible hours. I said deep Bible hours.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know anywhere close to enough of pre-Nicaean Christian tradition to do a serious take on the fishes. Yeah. But I think what we've learned so far, the fishes being bad guys is, or rather, like the guy in charge of the fishes as of the film being a bad guy is sort of surprising to the viewer. You're not expecting it.
Yeah,
which does subvert kind of the good guy, bad guy situation you were expecting to see.
We did talk a little bit before about like how the fishes are bad. Whatever they are, they're bad. Yeah. And like I think we could frame them as the Tradicals, because it's clear that like while they're striving mentally for some kind of, or they're striving ideologically for some kind of better world, but they keep getting hung up on ideology.
Well, I wouldn't say Tradicals. I would say Dem Soaks if we were going to make. But
there's a religious aspect to what they're doing.
Yeah, but there's a religious aspect to the whole movie.
Because maybe like when it's all just a metaphor for the Catholic Church. What if this is, I just cracked the code It's a movie about the young pope. This is all metaphor for the Catholic Church.
We need to stop saying the young pope.
Misguided.
I can hear you saying young pope in my head now.
This is the young pope episode now.
No joke. We are going to do a young pope episode.
We promise.
But I'm sorry, I shouldn't have derailed you because you had a good point there.
Well, I wanted to just point out that Miriam is the name of a Jewish prophet from the Old Testament, and that when they shoot Michael Caine, Theo goes up there and is like, "What the fuck was that?" And she's like, "Oh, it's all part of some greater plan." And he's like, "Shut the fuck up." And so I think that is ultimately a condemnation of whatever religious resistance there is to fascism.
Or rather, in my perspective, is rather than being gradualists, these are the fishes are sort of the, not tankies, but by any means necessary sorts of rebels, the sort of unprincipled, well, not accelerationists, but
similar in that they don't care about collateral damage.
Yeah, the sort of resistance to fascism that is itself inspired by fascism.
So it's the
they're fascists who just happen to they're social fascists. They're fascists who just happen to like refugees more. But what you see them do is you see them kill an innocent dude. You see them shooting at in one of the concentration camps. You see them shooting at a bus just to get Theo, or going on these creating these sorts of secret societies that are very insular, very esoteric, and then when someone dies, it's part of a greater plan because they've got a plan for how this is all going to work. Well, what Theo is basically rejecting that plan and saying, no, I need to liberate this child now. I need to do this, and he does it within his own sort of individual power. I think there's a lot of ideological interpretations for Theo. Maybe he's an egoist. Holy shit. No. But I think what is pretty obvious is that you're not meant to think that the fishes are a good response to fascism.
Oh, of course not.
But I think more importantly, you're supposed to walk away wondering what should your response to fascism be? How do you react to it?
Okay, so I pose that one thing this movie definitely also is, in addition to being sort of a question about how to react to fascism and the circumstances we find ourselves in, is definitely pro-breeder, pro-natalist, pro-future, right? It obviously thinks that the hope of a future is a good thing. And now when I say pro-breeder and pro-natalist, I'm using respectively a sort of light slur and an old-fashioned saying for people who like to have kids. And I think there's some really, really good anti-natalist and anti-breeder arguments to be considered. One of my favorites, I don't know if it's necessarily the best one, but it's a really interesting one, is an author named Lee Edelman wrote a book called No Future, which is...
Yeah, I think I've seen that.
It's a really fascinating book, and it's essentially about how the posing of a political future in particular is always a denial of the existence of queer and, to a lesser extent, trans or non-binary people who are not participant in the structure of reproductive futurism, of people who will give birth to the next generation. So a phrase like voice of a generation, or we need to, fight for the kids, or what will the children think, things like that. Those are all reproductive futurist ways of reinforcing this idea that what is the most important thing in any policy is that it continues a certain form of human life that involves having children. And that is what in part justifies queer genocide and trans genocide.
I think it's interesting because that is a very interesting sort of biological reductionism, rather than saying that, we're built this way because, or we do the things we do because we're built a certain way. It's saying that these political beliefs we hold all reinforce this sort of biological sex drive to which certain people are excluded, and you've created this inherently unworkable system.
So it's like it's reversing. It's reversing kind of the thing that we talked about in the last news episode, where it's like we are this way because we have X body parts. It's saying instead, no, we
reinforce views.
Yeah, we reinforce the system that. We reinforce ideas of these body parts through an ideology that we draw upon to justify them.
Which in the
more accurate, and I don't think that contradicts necessarily like I'm not going to ascribe a biology first position to Lee Edelman, but I don't think that they're anti some understanding of biological sex and reproduction.
Oh, no, that's not what I meant. I meant that that some of these behaviors are ascribed to biology inherently within the system he describes.
Well, that's a really interesting thing, is because the ascription of a certain behavior to either human nature or biology is a classic fascist, racist, like, trick, you know? This is the race science 101 trick, is to say there are fundamental biological characteristics. Now, I'm not saying there's no.
And this
such
is just
thing.
expanding what those characteristics are, what the set of characteristics that can be ascribed to fascism,
or a particular interpretation of those characteristics that is favorable to a hierarchization of people, and an explanation for why they are not to be trusted with their own lives and with, you know, certain liberties.
But what's interesting here in this film then is the fact that this is a denial of the sort of fascist baseline. If the fascist baseline is reproductive futurism, what happens to fascism when you remove it? When you remove any hope for children, when you remove any hope for a future, when essentially you turn the entire country into asexual people with no chance of reproductive success.
Well, so that's the interesting thing, and why I think this movie is reactionary is because it posits that people would go apeshit. And
I think that simplifies it too much. I think the answer to that question is they double down on their fascist beliefs in an attempt to learn to live with reality. Like we talked about Nigel, like he just doesn't want to think about it. So like he can't let go of the fascist ideology.
The film, oh yeah, I like that. It's saying
that's a good point.
It's saying that in response to a desexualizing of the human condition, the response of people who essentially are already proto-fascists is to fully accept fascism, because that would be a return to the good times.
Well, yeah, like I think that's a pretty accurate position to take, because, well, let's look at the way liberals reacted to the election. Let's look at the alt POTUS account.
Yeah. It's a regress
for a coup or whatever.
One of the things that I think is really interesting is the way nationalism is used as sort of a proxy for that biological necessity.
Well, that's the point, right? Is that reproduction futurism is about the reproduction of the state form, exemplified by the whole and like static individual agent, you know, in the Western tradition of philosophy, the potentially Republican parliamentary or somewhat representative state that functions by some mechanism of reason, and the nuclear family, right? And like then, of course, the functioning sort of like village or town. All of these structures, right, are designed to make you crave a certain stability and a certain static posture that is actually equivalent in a lot of cases in actual policy to killing people, to causing tremendous amounts of suffering, you know?
Yeah. And pulling those two sides of that coin onto the same playing field, like in this film. Because actually, one of the things about this film that I think is very interesting is, in Nazi Germany, a person would have to go pretty far out of their way to find, like, visible examples of dead Jews. You would have to go to a camp and go in and find it. Whereas in this movie, it's on public display. I mean, some of the possibly more horrifying parts are hidden, but you've got cages full of people on the street.
Is there anything horrifying than the cages, though? I mean,
the death camps are probably more horrifying.
The things we have come up with in CIA black sites in Egypt will make cages on the street seem like a picnic.
I need to look into that.
there are some Camp 731s for sure in this world.
Oh, yeah.
Where they're like fucking with people's genitals to make them reproduce or something. But I think what's interesting is that when it's all laid bare, and when fascism isn't accepted, which it isn't by the viewer, or so we think, we're horrified by what's going on. We're horrified by the vision of a world gone crazy, a world gone mad, where we want to change it, but we have no means of doing it. And when you stop and you realize that you're as powerless as Theo is, for example, at the beginning, you have to question whether or not you would actually make the leap of faith that Theo does during this film, which is to risk his life in trying to rescue Key, to then follow that through and follow her to the dock and get to go into the concentration camp, become a refugee, become a person who is possibly going to, has death hanging over them at all times. That is a much more demanding experience than what the fishes do, which is shoot at cops and run around.
Absolutely.
And
here is
it
why
is very much
antinatalism-
like Stations of the Cross in that to actually be liberatory, to actually contain some kind of revolutionary potential, it must come not from people outside of the class structure who have removed themselves from the class structure, but it must come from people within it. And if you're not within it, you need to be within it.
People who are reproducing it on a daily basis.
Yes. And Theo, when he goes in this journey, when he stops trying to work with the fishes and he goes into the camp and he makes his way to that apartment and Key gives birth and he's taking the baby through the city, that is him fully taking on the role of the lowest underclass individuals there are. That is him at humanity's lowest point in this entire world. It does not get worse than what it is like for those people in that camp. And it's only from that position that he's actually able to, if you're taking the most hopeful stance, to save the world, to save this baby.
Very Christ-like again.
Yeah, absolutely.
It comes back to this sort of interplay of that fascism as the experience of day-to-day life, as well as revolution as not just the rejection of, but the inversion of everyday life. It's not just saying that you don't want to participate. It's saying that you will make yourself a victim of it in the process of destroying it.
Yeah, and very powerfully put.
Yeah.
But this is exactly why I think that being anti-breeder is actually a very radical position, is because I don't think that it's necessary, but I do think that this sort of hope that you're going to eke things out and there will be a better tomorrow is a foolish one. Because as you put it, we have to make that decision in our own lives. We have everyone in the world, and in particular right now, the place that's vital interest to us is the United States, because we're living in it. We have to make that decision. And are enough people going to decide not to collaborate and going to decide to potentially risk their life in order to actually resist, as opposed to being part of a resistance?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that's so fucking goofy about the resistance in America, because it doesn't come from a place that resistance is even possible from. You can't be in a resistance if you're capable of fascistically removing yourself from the struggle at any point. Fascists are capable of ignoring the problems of the world. Only fascists are capable of ignoring the problems of the world, because fascism enables that. So when these people in the resistance are able to say, yeah, I'm fighting Donald Trump, but then just go on a cruise to Cuba, and I'm subtweeting Sally Albright here, but when you're able to do that while being resistance, then you're showing how impotent and how collaborationist your resistance is, which is what this movie, I think, at its core, is trying to say, that you're not capable of being a member of any resistance unless your resistance is actually from the underclass.
But I think it then falls short with its Christ-like thing where it becomes very individualistic and it's like, oh, one person can do this, which I think was my critique of the ending, my more nihilist critique of it, where it was like, okay, yeah, one guy did something and there's one baby now, like, what's the hope there? That he doesn't have any support, no one liked him.
I'm just going to say propaganda of the deed and walk away.
Yeah.
Very nice, very nice.
But yeah, I think we hit the big ones there. I really liked Rebar. I really liked your take on what is it? No future.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really liked that. That was very interesting.
It's a really fascinating book, and it has also. I personally am someone who dislikes children. I don't really enjoy them. And
here
it has some,
Discourse Collective is anti-children.
Yes,
I
that's
think one
right.
of us is, but it has some. But being anti-kids in general is probably a bad reactionary take. Now, it has some of the best kid hating in it. It is just so, there's this one paragraph in particular that I would love to find, and we should record maybe for the next episode or something, where it's just like, fuck little orphan Annie, fuck the waif from Les Mis, fuck every single figure of the child that has been used to like repress us, to beat a hole in Matthew Shepard's head, so on and so forth. And I'm just like, it is some powerful stuff, and it makes you be like, yeah, fuck those kids in those movies.
Well,
I hate them.
It stems from like a rejection of the traditional structure of family as well, doesn't it? I mean, like, I think
Absolutely.
the way we look at kids definitely stems from the way we look at families, and I think if we started looking at kids a different way, we would start raising kids a different way, which would fundamentally disrupt the traditional structure of family. And, like, I'm not one to advocate for a solution for that, but, like, obviously the two-parent household is not... I mean, like, I'm against that personally, and I think that is part of the biggest part of the traditional structure of family.
Yeah, I'm in favor. I mean, like, obviously people can decide to have kids or not, but the fact of the matter is, like, when you decide to have a child, you decide to bring something into being that will suffer, for sure. And you also decide to bring something into being that will add to the environmental load of the planet. And, I mean, I think there's plenty of people who make those decisions in perfectly good conscience, and that's fine. It's not a decision that I want to make, and I also think for me it's a kind of a very lame, like, putting my money where my mouth is move to say that I got a vasectomy because I care about fighting for things in my lifetime and the lifetime of people who currently exist.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
I didn't get a vasectomy yet, but I am going to. I'm threatening to.
Wait.
As
I'm
well,
going to bring
like,
this
for
back.
different
I'm going to bring
reasons,
this back to the movie. I'm going to bring this back to the
adopt
movie.
your reasons.
Do it.
This movie is taking place in a world where any change has to be for within your own lifetime.
Absolutely.
Oh shit, yeah.
Nobody in this movie has any expectation that they will have kids. No one in this movie has any expectation that the world is going to radically get better, that something is going to change, or that there's any kind of solution to the problems they're living in. Because fascism is dependent on having children and this promise of there will be another chance to do this as its
cop-out.
And that's, I guess, why
it's
change.
Fascinating to me that there isn't a larger depiction of people who, instead of saying, I have nothing to lose, I'm going to become, part of a street gang, or I'm going to become part of the fascist police or whatever. We have nothing to lose. We're going to, start a commune and treat people nice.
Yeah, that was my issue with it too. I think that was what I was trying to get at.
There's trees and stuff. I'm sure the environment has undergone massive trauma due to this, wars and whatnot in this movie.
Yeah, I think they mentioned it a little bit.
Well, I'm going to be a little more generous and say that I assume that
of course,
under a fascist government, those sorts of things probably end pretty poorly.
Although I think there is an example of it in Michael Caine's character.
Yeah.
There are obviously people who go and do their own thing, and certainly maybe there are small communes. Side
note, I really love the little details about what the future would be like in absence of this fascist regime, because there's little things like the music. When Michael Caine is like, let's put on a little bit of music while we're smoking weed, and it's this insane dissonant screaming and drums that are all cut up.
Sounds like a
and it's just
beat.
That's tight.
Yeah, it's it's fucking unlistenable.
Yeah.
But he's like this old man, and he's doing like an air guitar, and you're like, you know what? Yeah, that's what a future could be like.
That's what
if
we're
I
gonna
was
be
able.
like as old men.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I'm gonna be sitting there and being like guillotine, and I'm gonna be in like a wheelchair in a home.
We'll make our own home.
Yeah, it's called a commune.
Yeah,
friends.
we'll do a commune nursing home. That'd be sick.
We need
actually.
to make commune nursing homes. That should.
That's an incredibly good point. Old people are treated very poorly by our society.
Oh, hell
They
yeah.
should form communes and radicalize.
The only
They have a
problem
lot
is
to lose from like loss of services.
the only problem is like physical disabilities. Like who
Yeah.
would do the physical labor?
Falk, baby, Falk. Fully automated luxury.
Sadly,
retirement
you
communities.
know that like there's some algorithm out there scraping every podcast on SoundCloud for ideas for how Thiel and Richard Branson are going to live into the next century. And Richard Branson is now going to be the one with the Falk commune.
I will kill Richard Branson. Anyway,
You're to hear first, folks.
tune in next week for we are going to kill every celebrity and millionaire on the planet. Folks,
I'm going to go write a thread about Marx quitting becoming a Hegelian.
I'm going to go write a thread about how we need to fully automate our luxury retirement communities under communism.
I'm gonna read those threads and regurgitate them in my college essays and get horrible grades and flunk out. All right.
And I'll see y'all.
Stay in school, everyone.
Do your
Drop
best.
out of school. Kill your teachers. Adios.
Adios.